Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's TDU Live. This week, I'm going to be talking about Renderman, Pixar's Renderman, and showing you all how to set it up a little bit. It's not going to be a master class. It's going to teach you everything about it. In fact, I just learned about it myself about a week ago. So I installed this on my computer about a week ago, and I'm just super excited about it, and I couldn't wait to show you all. So this is the fastest and easiest way for me to do that. So again, not going to show you everything, just going to show you a brief introduction on where you can get some files and where you can download everything. But first, wanted to go through a couple quick things. First off, we have a free masterclass that we're going to be conducting on, or I'm going to be conducting on Wednesday, February 27th. That will be, there's a link to that webinar down below in the comments section here on the Facebook group. You can sign up there. I will be talking about lighting and 3 steps to lighting a well-lit shot. One of the things that we're hoping to have for that is our fabulous, let's see where he's at. He's hiding. Our fabulous TDU bunny. So the TDU bunny's coming along. We're going to release this mysteriously, but I'll show you guys some quick lighting tests that we're doing on her there. This is Luna. And we're just working with the materials now. These are just some stress tests of different lighting situations, just trying out a few different things with her and moving forward from there. So hopefully we'll have this to demonstrate on for the webinar. If not, we've got a lot of other great features. But let's dive into the reason why we're here, and that is Renderman. So let me pop open Maya here. This is IT or IT. I don't know what you call it because I've only ever seen it written. This is our rendering interface with Renderman. But I wanted to start by showing you all where you can get Renderman to begin with. So if you just go to the renderman.pixar.com website, again, I have a link down below in the comments section. You can, let me just make sure we're all good. Everybody can hear me. Any questions? Yeah, just making sure everyone can hear me first before I go back into this. We've had issues with that before. So Renderman. Click here. All you need to do is you'll probably need to create an account. You will need to create an account through the Renderman site. So I just created my Michael Tanzillo one here. And then all you have to do is click this Renderman Try It Free button. It works with Maya. It works with Katana. I know they're still working on it with Houdini. I don't think they've released that yet. But just judging from the frequently asked questions down here, there's the Maya trial and the Katana trial. And again, this is Renderman version 22. Once you get it downloaded, I would highly recommend opening up the Renderman documentation, again, in the link down below. Their documentation is fantastic. It's got everything that you need to know about it. Additionally to the written documents, they've got all these resources. They've got some assets you can download. They've got documents you can read. Basically everything that you could possibly need, including some lighting challenges here that you can find as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the lighting workflow. So one of the things that you can download is this Mr. Bean head, this portrait, and this is exactly how I downloaded it. I didn't do a thing to this yet. So all you have to do is download it and set the project to this file, render it out, and away you go. They've already got materials and shaders and everything all set up so you can start working with it. Now, when you download the Pixar Renderman or the Renderman for Maya renderer, the one thing that you need to do to set it up is all I did was I opened a Maya session, went into my Windows settings and preferences plugin manager, and I just scrolled down and you'll see it down in here, Renderman for Maya, the Python script there. So that's it. And then away you go. Now we've got, if we open our render settings, you can see we've got a Renderman tab. There's a Renderman drop-down menu here, which we'll kind of talk about. And then also this Renderman 23.2 bar across the top of our Maya screen here. As you can see, we've got Mr. Bean here with lots of lights sprinkled around him, cards, reflection cards, that kind of thing. For this demo, I'm going to go ahead and delete those because we want to just start with a fresh file here. Ooh. Okay, so now everything will be rendering out black, but you can see we've got this guy here. We've got him on a white background. We've got the camera, which is our render cam directly in front of him, and we should be all set. So let's see. Now, the first thing that we want to do is I'm going to go take you through these samples here. So the first button is just the render button, render current frame. You can hover over and get these. This is our IPR renderer, which you were seeing before. Can open that image tool. So the IPR renderer functions inside it or IT, the image tool, and not in Maya's natural IPR renderer. Over here is where we create our lights, and here's where we create some shaders. This is where we open our texture manager and some other stuff. So just so you know, Renderman does not work well with Maya shaders. It only works with the Pixar shaders. So you can see if you right click here, you can see all the different shaders. The PXR surface shader is kind of their catch-all, their default one. But I'll go ahead and start talking about some lighting things. And while I'm doing that, I'm gonna continue to hop over here to make sure that we can see everything. Got an all good from Jasmine. Thank you, Jazz. And make sure that we're doing well there. Okay, so the first thing I wanna do is just talk about some lighting stuff. So we have the lighting window here. We are going to create and these are the 6 lights that we have to choose from. There's a rectangle light, a disc light, a distant light, spherical light, cylindrical light, and an AOV light. You'll notice there's no point light, there's no spotlight. I will show you how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a rectangle light and just show you how that works. And then I'll take you to the docs to take you through all the different lights. So we'll go ahead and we'll launch the IPR renderer. This will take a second, and this will allow me to talk to you all about how Renderman is a path tracing renderer, which is very similar to a ray tracing renderer. It starts with samples of the camera and fires samples around the scene, and then the samples bounce off of each other, because the whole point of Renderman is to be a photorealistic renderer. It is meant to simulate the way that light naturally flows in the environment in our world, and it's meant to simulate that. So you'll see a lot of interactive light bouncing around between the eye, between the eyebrows, inside the ears. The reason why we're keeping this white plate in there is just so that didn't save out the old one. Let's see. Now it's launching again. And the reason why we're keeping that white surrounding plate is that if you've worked with Arnold, it's very similar, where if you have like a white surrounding, you're going to get a lot more light bouncing into the scene. Now, if this is working well, if this is exactly what we want, we should be seeing a black render pop up here in just a second. But this is the beauty of being live. Sometimes things take an extra second. But in the meantime, I can go ahead and start talking about some of the attributes here in the parameters off to the right-hand side. So very similar, again, to any software that you work with. There's our black frame. To any other software that you've worked with, where you've got color, or the intensity, the exposure, and the color, all very straightforward. So I'm looking through the rectangular light now. We're going to go ahead and back this out over here and face him with it. And now we can see we just want to go ahead and up the exposure 10. And actually this light is pretty small. So we'll go ahead and, I meant to mention this too. Whenever you create a Renderman light, it's got this little super R on it. It looks like a Superman type figure. So go ahead and crank this up. Make this bigger. So this is actually a good example of how the way that the light works in Renderman is it's based on the size of the light too. So the larger the light, the actual more light it'll output. It's trying to simulate the way that, again, light works in reality, or the light would work in a studio. So the larger the light source, it'll actually output more light. It'll also create a softer shadow. And as you can see, if you look through the selected here, you can rotate this around. And right now we're looking through the light, so I moved it closer so it got brighter. Now we're moving over here to the side. Drop this down here, move it in a little bit. There we go. Now you can see we're getting a lot of indirect light. There's light bouncing up around here, and that's because the path rays are coming down here, bouncing up, going around all over the place. And each one of these like blue squares of light that are squares that are going through the render here. What that's doing is it's calculating another ray of light bouncing around. So you'll often see your IPR image actually get brighter as you go. Like the very first pass through, it might be dark, and then the second one, it'll show up more light, depending on how much light is bouncing around the room. So, okay. So just to kind of go through some of the parameters here of the rec light. Again, intensity is the multiplier of the color. The exposure is based on stops of a camera. So different people can control, you can control these however you want in terms of exposure and intensity. If you think about things more photographically, you might want to think about stopping up and down in exposure. If you're working with an art director who tells you to make things 50% as bright, you just might want to cut that intensity in half. Color map, if you want to map in a color, a file path in there. The gamma, if you want to adjust the camera and the saturation of the map. Now, we've got emission focus. Emission focus is, like I said, there's no spotlight, but what you can do with emission focus is if you up this, let that play out, the focus of the light becomes more focused. So it's starting to function similarly to a spotlight, where instead of this rectangle light that shoots out light everywhere, it starts to kind of focus it in and make it more of a spotlight. You also have this option down here of making these cone angles. By default, it's like 90 degrees in all direction from the camera, so it's kind of spraying out. You can start to focus this in, and as we're looking through the camera here, you can actually see these lines come in the corners here. So I can just like focus it on a small part of his face, and then I can soften that edge a little bit if I need to. So it can, although there is no, like I said, there is no spotlight, you can have a similar type of a thing here using the refine tool of the emission and the emission focus and the core angle. You can tint the focus, like this is, I'm not quite sure too many situations where you would do this, but just so you are aware, you can focus this in and then you can tint this to make it like a red color. And that's everything outside of the spotlight now becomes a tinted value. We've got the specular amount, diffuse amount, just controls the amount of specular and diffuse values in our scene. So I took down the specular, so now it's all diffuse contribution. We've got no diffuse, so it's all spec. We can do light profile stuff. You can add IES, which IES profiles are from light manufacturers. It basically gives the light like a gobo shape. So, you know, you can see lights in interior spaces, how they kind of have a shape when they're against the wall. There's like bright rings and dark rings and all that stuff. You can simulate a manufactured light that way. And then this is a good one, intensity near the distance. I like this one because if you're like super close to an object, like let's say I've got my coffee cup here and I've got a light that's right up against it, usually this becomes super duper bright. And then, but you're pumping it up because the light's falling off and you want it to hit an object over here. What that intensity near distance does is it says, if like treat this as if it were 2 units away. Like if I set that to 2, anything inside of 2 units would be the brightness of if it were 2 units away. So it stops something from being very close to the screen from being super, super bright. Just check and see if anybody has any questions. Looks like we're all good. So I'll get back to this. Okay, and you can see as it's going through, I love this IPR render. It just like, it looks like, I don't know, it just looks like the future, you know what I mean? Like everything's kind of sprinkling around there. Yeah, and then from there, we've got some more settings. We've got some shadow samples. You can change the shadow stuff. One thing I wanted to talk to you about was these light filters. I'm gonna go ahead and open up. I really like the emission focus because I think it's a really nice, soft approach to like creating a spotlight type effect and really zeroing the focus of the light. But I want to talk about these. Let me go down here. Light filters. So light filters are where we can add some elements to the light to help define the look of it and define the shape of it. We can do barn doors. Barn doors are, if you've ever worked in a studio, you've ever seen spotlights for a theater or a stage, those are those flaps that are on the side. So we can drop some barn doors in here. That's if we have this light selected. And then we can go into the barn door settings and so we can open up that radius, open up that edge. Let's see. Change the width and the height. Ooh. These are kind of being a pain in the butt this time. Okay. Physical analytic. There we go. Okay, now you can start to see the barn doors opening up on the object as we make it bigger and bigger. So it's, again, just flaps on the side. You got the width, you got the height, you've got the radius of it. So if I made this bigger, you see it opening up a little more. And then you can control the edge, and this will control the softness of the edge on it as well. So that's one light filter that we can add there. And we can go and break this connection. On top of that, we've got light blockers, which are pretty cool. So I'm going to talk about, okay, so this is a goofy one with Renderman, and I still 100% haven't figured it out. So there are a couple of these that are not identical. They're very, very similar. So there's light blockers, which we've seen in Arnold and other software, which you can create geometry and it'll block light from a certain area. There's also rod filters, which are pretty identical to light blockers. Rod is short for region of darkness. So we'll go ahead and just make a rod filter here because, again, they're pretty much doing the exact same thing. And I'll show you what they're doing. So with this rod filter, I'm going to go ahead and just place it over half of his face like that. And then what we can see here is now the region of darkness is kind of creeping up over his face a little bit in every place that isn't inside of this sphere that we've created. And we can control that shape by making it more capsule-y. We can adjust the height of it, and we can adjust the depth of it. We can control the radius of the scale of it. We can soften the edges of it. And the idea is that we can block light from happening in certain areas by creating these regions of darkness in the shot. Now, the reason why there are both rod filters and light blockers, from what I can guess, is that they are legacy. Because, like, as you're updating Renderman versions, you may have a rod filter or light blocker from a previous version, and you want that to keep working in future versions of Renderman, so they probably kept both of them in there. But going through the documentation, and you all can go through this documentation over here in some of the lighting stuff, and you can see that they're very, very similar. So I'm only going to show you the rod filters because they have everything that a light blocker has, plus more control. But I'm not going to go too deep in that because I got some other stuff that I definitely want to cover here. So we're going to break this connection. Huh. I guess I can just delete it. Oh no, break connection. Come on. There we go. Okay, so now we have, again, cookies and gobos, which are, again, cookies and gobos are the same thing. A cookie cutter is just let's bring this up. It's this shape that doesn't appear in the scene, but it will work as a blocker for that light. So like if I wanted to pull this over here and slide it that way, you can start to see that it blocks light off to a certain region, and you can create, like, let's say we wanted to create a couple of these for the light. We can go back into the rectangular light. You can see this here. We can right click here and we can append, and now we can add another one. And similar to gobos and cookies and other software, we can add maps to them. We can, let's see. So now there's just like a sliver of light that's fitting through here. Let's go move this out. So we can block the light in front of him and behind him, and just create a sliver of light here on his ear. If we wanted to do that, and then of course we can map images onto here. We can control the density of this and make it so it's only like 50% blocking it, 100% blocking it. We can have it only block specular light and not block any of the diffuse light. Really, whatever we want there. And then the last two I'm going to show you are, and again, now that we can delete that one and go back to just one. I'm just going to talk about, there's a multiply light filter, which creates like a rod type shape and it allows you to increase light in certain areas, and a ramp light filter, which does the same thing, but allows you to multiply the light by like a ramp of value. So if you want like a range of light to darkness being passed through a ramp, you can do that. Hop over and see if we have any questions. Pablo asks, which Mac are you using for the demo? I am using just a MacBook Pro. I mean to know if it's possible to work in terms of lighting with a laptop. Yeah, absolutely. I've created all of these classes. Jasmine and I exclusively have laptops. Jasmine has already answered that with Mike is using the MacBook Pro. Yep. So that's the great thing about 2019 is that we have these, this is a pretty powerful laptop that's strong enough to run these IPR renderers. I mean, is it the fastest way to do it? No, but like for the money that you're paying for these laptops, it certainly does the trick. Now, the one limitation for Mac, this actually gives me a really great segue into something. So one of the really cool things about Renderman is that they have this denoise workflow. They have two different denoisers. One works with the IT renderer, and with that one, it actually, you can see here in this document, I don't know how well you guys can see it on the screen, but you can see it actually goes through and cleans up a lot of the noise on the image. Now, the two different ones that we were talking about, one is actually built into the renderer itself, so that when you're batch rendering frames, it'll go through and kind of clean up the noise in a shot. And here they've got some really great swipey back and forth things, so you can see this stuff. Because that's a downside of path tracing is that you're going to get some noisy elements and some fireflies and stuff. So this will go through and clean up anything that's in the renderer. They also have one if you're working, and it's only if you're working like with an NVIDIA card on, and it doesn't work on Mac because Mac doesn't have this, but it'll actually denoise your IP renders in in IT here in it. It'll actually go through and clean up some of the noise that you're getting in there, which works out really great if you're working with an art director or somebody at your desk and you just want to see things quickly. Obviously, I can't demonstrate that here, so I'd highly suggest you hop over to this Wikipedia page and you can see how it's cleaning it up. It's really, really cool stuff. And then, I wanted to show you a couple of render settings here, because again, we only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to get through these and show you just some of the special parts of Renderman. Wait, let me go ahead and take care of this. Yes, don't save that. So I just want to talk about a couple things here with the render settings. In general, it's all pretty straightforward stuff. We can set the path. We can render out this stuff. We can talk about the image size. We can talk about the resolution, how you're going to render it out. All that stuff is pretty standard. When we hop over to the Renderman, you've got these additional filters. So up first, we've got our samples. The maximum samples by default, this is crazy. It bounces light around 128 times. Just by default, that's just what it does. The IPR cuts that in half down to 64, but just imagine the light bouncing around 128 times, and that's how it's able to get their very cool look and the very photoreal look. Now, actually, let me open this back up. I closed my IPR renderer a little fast because I want to talk about this too. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit while this is loading. Get out of the way. So I'm going to jump down here to the PXR path tracer, because again, one thing I wanted to show you that's unique to Renderman is it uses different integrators. Integrators are essentially the engine that it's using to render. By default, it uses the PXR path tracer because, again, that's what Renderman by default is. It's a path tracer. And within this PXR path tracer, you get different settings here. You get the max depth of amount that the light's bouncing around. You get different light samples in different regions. Again, in the light samples, the BX shader sample, and then the indirect samples. I was advised not to adjust these too much, to just work with the overall samples. And then additionally, I wanted to show you all this setting. which is the Russian roulette, which is very, very cool. So again, I talked about how there's 128 bounces bouncing around. It's really, really inefficient if every single raid does that. So what they did was they installed this idea called Russian roulette. What Russian roulette does is says if after 4 bounces, the light ray only has is less than 20% of the original strength of the original ray, go ahead and kill it. Because, or really any ray after 4, go ahead and kill it because it's not going to be contributing to the lighting of the scene too well. So although it has the potential to bounce things around 128 times, it will intelligently kill any ray that is less than 20% of the original intensity of the ray when it first started after 4 bounces. Of course, you can change those settings, but that's just the default. I wanted to make you aware of that. And then indirect clamping. One of the issues with path tracing and ray tracing in general with indirect illumination is occasionally values can kind of go haywire and create these fireflies. Anyone who's worked with Arnold or anything really has seen these kind of bright dings in their bright pixels in their image. What the indirect clamping does is it finds any rays with a pixel value. So this default setting of 2 and 10, it finds any secondary ray, any second bounce ray that has a value of 10, like an RGB value of 10, and it'll actually clamp it to that value. So it won't allow, because sometimes pixels can blow up and go up to 1,000 or tens of thousands. This will block it at 10 so that you can still kind of control it. That's a pretty high threshold. So if you want to knock that down, you can. Now, I want to talk about the different integrators here for a minute. So we've got the path tracer. That is the most common one. There's also the PXR unified. And again, these are all in these integrators in the Renderman documentation. You can go through each one individually and see the benefits of each one and see how they're being used. But the unified one just handles caustic stuff a little bit differently. It has some minor differences to the look that you can utilize as well. So if I switch over to the unifier, it would change the shadow qualities a little bit and just make it look a little bit of a different quality. Now, the PXR occlusion. So most people think of the occlusion as a different render pass, or it actually is a shader. But in Renderman, it's actually a separate integrator. So you actually render your shot using the integrator of occlusion instead of applying an occlusion shader to it. Just something to be aware of there. And again, I think I know this is because they don't necessarily want you doing the old school way of rendering occlusion as a separate pass and adding it to a scene, because occlusion doesn't care about light direction and will actually add shadows to the dark contact shadows to the illuminated part of the image and actually make things look darker than they should, and actually kind of makes it look a little bit dirty at times in the light areas. So not always the best thing. You can do a direct lighting, which does not take into account any secondary light rays, any subsurface scattering, any of that nonsense. And then the PXR visualizer as well kind of just does more of a the mesh if you wanted to use that for demos or things like that. But by default, we just use the nice PXR path tracer. A couple other things I wanted to point out to you all here. And again, here's just the features. It's pretty basic stuff about motion blur and some other stuff. AOVs. These are your embedded layers inside of your let's see if I can view the AOVs. I thought I could, but I don't believe I can in this viewer. But trust me that when I say that they're here. One thing you should know about the AOVs is that they just by the interface here. So anytime that you see these AOVs inside of underneath, they're in this collapsible window, they will be embedded AOVs inside that EXR versus if I just added, let's see, say I wanted to add the the subsurface. Actually, we already have a subsurface. The indirect diffuse unoccluded. Like, let's say I wanted to add that to this, and if I middle mouse click outside, ooh, how do I get outside there? Let's see, try again. There we go. Let's say I had these two AOV passes, they would now render out as separate renders. So anything embedded underneath here in this collapsible window is in one EXR file. Anything outside of here becomes a separate one. You can also, if you want after the fact, you can also add them together. So now that they can be added into one. So now this guy's got that as well. Now, one of the cool things about Renderman is if we look at one of these AOVs, you'll see this light, like these LPE commands down here. These are light path expressions. These are powerful because these are, again, just the default AOVs that you can create, but you can use light path expressions to write code that will output any AOV that you want. So you can do things to the reflection, the transmission, the diffuse, the specular values, and all you need to do is drop in a similar, let's see, like a line of code like this into your specialized user areas down here, and then you can create your own AOVs however you want. That's just for those that are so choosing to do that. Again, there's great documentation for that, and that'll show you everything that you need to know. Let's see if we have any other questions before I move on. Yes, Pablo, is some filter to obtain light only inside of the figure? I mean the geo. Is there some filter to obtain light only inside of the figure? I mean geo. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Only inside the figure. Like if is there a way to gather a filter of light only inside it? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm sorry. Would you mind rephrasing that? I'm going to jump back over and I'll come back to that. I absolutely promise that because I want to answer that question. But the last thing I wanted to show you all as a demo was a way of, because one other light source that they have in here is a mesh light. And a mesh light can turn any piece of geometry into a light source. And I'm going to turn off the rectangular light here. And what I want to do, and now our render goes black, is let's say I wanted to make Mr. Bean a scary character and I wanted his eyes to glow. Normally what my instinct would be to apply a shader with a glowing element, like a lot of self-illumination, and that would kind of push light around. You don't necessarily want to do that in Renderman because what happens is you any material light that's coming out of a material is actually thought of as secondary light bounces or secondary light rays, and it'll actually be noisier and more expensive than if they were primary light rays. And the way that you make them primary light rays is to make the objects actual mesh lights. And you do that by this PXLR mesh light guy here. And you go ahead and just drop those in. And now these eyes are glowing, and we can actually increase their, this is what I'm talking about. So the first pass through, you'll see this value, and the second pass through, it actually gets brighter. So don't necessarily evaluate your lights, especially if you have very, very bright light sources. Don't necessarily evaluate it based on the first bounce, because you're going to see it increase in value as you're going through the second, third, fourth, because light's really going to start bouncing around as it calculates those additional rays. And then while that's boiling up, one thing I wanted to point out too, there's this guy here. This is a, oh wait, this one, I'm sorry. So in these, we've got the, we've got dome lights, which I forgot to mention in the other example. Dome light is just your skylight that surrounds it. A portal light will focus the dome light into a smaller region. And then just watch out for this environment daylight thing. This was meant as like a quick visualization for lights and never meant for production. So, and people have been using it for production, and I would not recommend that. In terms of, let me go back to the lighting because I do want to point out that all of these lights that I mentioned, they have a really great documentation for each and every one of them. Like the dome light that I just mentioned, it's just, they have great examples of what all the different settings do. Because again, it's just a dome light that's wrapping all around. We've got a disc light, which is similar to the area light, the rectangular light that I showed you, but it's just circular in shape as opposed to rectangular. There is the distant light, which is the first distant light that I've ever seen that I find very useful, and I would actually use it in production because you have some control over the the shadow quality and shadow samples, and actually the length of the shadow too. You can control that. And then additionally, we've got the AOV light, which is a light that does not illuminate. It's strictly for generating information that can be used in the composite in our AOV passes. So, okay, let's see. Geo emitting light, perhaps? No worries. Oh, wait, here we go. Oh, man, you guys are so good. No, I mean that inside a block of light, the filter allows the light and only inside of itself. But I mean, oh, you can invert the light blocker. I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay, I'm with you. You can, oh man, now I got this glowy-eyed dude. Let me go ahead and turn these off for a second. Let me just delete my mesh light here. Actually, let me just Control Z back to get that area light back. Here we go. Okay, so now let me right click and kill. Oh, yeah, there we go. Back to open. In your light filter, actually, this is going to take a second just to load, but I'm pretty sure that inside your light filter, in the rod filter, you can actually invert it so that, let's go ahead and look at the doc here while we're waiting for that to load. Light filters, we can do the rod light filter, and I believe there is an invert function. Radius, scale width, scale depth, left, right, top, back, front, left. Man, there are a lot of controls. Intensity, yes, invert. So you can see here that you can block off a certain area, and then you can invert that so it's only inside of it. I hope that answers your question, Pablo. Is that what you meant? Does it have a crypto mats AOV? Yes, it absolutely does. There are crypto mats that work within the AOV here, and they do have that set up as well. So that should function as well. Let me double check to see if that's easy enough to get to. I know I saw them before. Oh yeah, you can do mat IDs. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I haven't installed the CryptoMat plugin for Renderman yet, but they do work together well as well. So that's it. So if you all have any other questions, actually, let me just go ahead and see if I can get that, because now it's like a challenge. I want to get this inverted rod light working. Let's see, perspective. Got my rod light selected. Go ahead and cover this guy. Now where's the invert? There it is. So now if I invert that, yeah, there we go. Ah, look at that. So yeah, you can isolate it to just certain areas instead of the other areas. So boom. Okay, cool. If you all have any other questions, make sure you add it to the link down below or in the comments down below. I'll be happy to answer anything for you. Once again, just download it. We got the links down below. Don't forget to sign up for our free webinar happening in a couple weeks from today at this time. And we will be glad to host that for you as well. So thank you all for joining me here. You're very welcome, Calabaza. You guys are amazing. And I will talk to you all very soon. See you next week.